Happy, happy Saturday, everybody. Yeah, so we'll close this off. I mean, we'll start. We'll pick up where Cynthia ended here. At the end, she mentions the quote where Schiller is responding in his letters on the aesthetic education of man that with the French Revolution, a great moment had found the little people. But what was it about the failure of the French Revolution is now, Cynthia and Matt have sort of laid out and contrasted. What is that missing element? How do we act on something subjective, like man's soul and technically his mind, his imagination, and his sentiments, but in a way that is lawful, in a way that we can actually, they can be cultivated. How do we do that within ourselves, right? Can we develop our tastes, right? Or are we always just going to be sort of gravitating towards the immediate thing? I want to just set up the quote here. So in his second letter, I'll just read this. But should I not perhaps be able to make a better use of the freedom which you grant me than to focus your attention on the domain of the fine arts? Isn't it untimely at any rate to look for a code of law for the aesthetical world, since the affairs of the moral world present a much more immediate interest, and the philosophical spirit of investigation is so emphatically challenged by the circumstances of our time? To concern itself with the most perfect of all works of art, the construction of true political freedom. So why are we talking about art right now with everything going on in the world? We're kind of like in a low intensity World War III that's been happening for a while. Maybe some people have forgotten there's like a global showdown going on now. So talking about aesthetics, right? There's a lot of people that economically situation is very daunting, and the media doesn't always touch on these things. So we're responding to different inputs in the cybernetic sort of loops of what's the latest beef with Drake and Kendrick Lamar, or like who's got the upper hand, who's the most badass guy. Not really so much for that. So yeah, aesthetics. Now it sounds even cooler because we're going to start talking about beauty in light of all this. So with that, the title of my presentation, Schiller Against the Savages and the Barbarians, or the Art of Republics. So we've been talking about different kinds of governments, and depending on how sort of locked in and tuned into everything, the debates, especially among the younger generations, which is where a lot of the change comes from the youth contingent and sort of any cultural change. What is being discussed now, and there's a sense that democracy has failed, right? There's the masses, the people, self-government is sort of an experiment gone wrong. And there's a lot of evidence to support that claim. When you see what has been voted in, or what people actually, how they vote. And so that's one thing. So the one idea is that, but what is democracy, right? So there's this idea of just a collective mass of people voting with what they want, what their interests are, how do they maintain their current lifestyle, how do the suburban housewives keep the, flow of wine coming, and how do the, finance dudes keep making, 20% gains year over year or whatnot. So what's needed to keep that going? So Schiller here, he's going to talk, how do we, I'm going to read this quote. Is there a happy medium between don't change that yet. Is there a happy medium between this democratic sort of will of the people, and what's the other side, right? The idea now is that, well, you need a new Caesar. One conversations among the younger people, there's something called Bronze Age Mindset, which is a book by somebody, like his pseudonym was Bronze Age Pervert. So the idea is that he like man, modern man has become this sort of effeminate, passive thing. Western civilization has lost its thrust and its glory. And so the Bronze Age has this like archetype of like the strong. That's what had the Spartans, right? Or you have the Templar, right? The Crusaders. And so you could say, depending on who you're talking to, some will say that like the Christian West it lost its appetite for war, right? It allowed itself to be sort of dominated by effeminate culture, and it lost its like sort of courage to fight for and kill for God, fight for principles, fight for beauty. And so this has to be brought back to check the sort of democratic savagery of just the collective responding to whatever its immediate impulse and desires are. You need strong leaders, right? You need a new Caesar, a Napoleon or something. So that's the other side, right? So is there a happy medium between just collective democratic sort of savagery and sort of barbaric tyranny? So Schiller sets it up this way. If the inner man is at one with himself, he will maintain his individuality in the widest universality of his conduct, and the state will simply be the interpreter of his beautiful instinct, the more distinct formula of his own inner law. However, if the subjective man opposes the objective man in the character of people in so contradictory a fashion that only the suppression of the former can secure the victory of the latter, the state likewise will oppose the citizen with the full severity of the law and will have to ruthlessly crush such a hostile individuality in order not to be its victim. However, man can be opposed to himself in a twofold way. Either as a savage, when his feelings rule over his principles, or as a barbarian, when his principles destroy his feelings. The savage despises art and recognizes nature as his absolute master. The barbarian scorns and dishonors nature, but more contemptible than the savage, he frequently continues to be the slave of his slave, nature. The educated man, or the aristocratic man, as Dr. Kohn would say, makes nature his friend and honors its freedom, while he simply bridles its caprice. So is there a happy medium between people just, responding to their irrational wills or their impulses without any higher principle or awareness governing that, and lawfulness that maybe can be uncovered and be seemingly automatic, blind impulses? And so how do we do that? What can we do? How do we resolve that with reason, which is, reason is absolute, it's unchanging. And yet we have all sorts of feelings and we feel different from day to day. We have different desires, we have different hopes. So that's always in flux, but yet reason is something whole and unchanging. So is there a way to unite that such that we can have a rational debate? Let's start there. That we set up a rational debate. So Schiller puts it this way in his third letter. Nature begins with man no differently than with the rest of its works. It acts for him where he cannot act as an independent intelligence yet himself. But justice makes him man, that he doesn't remain what simple nature made of him, but possesses the ability to retrace the steps through reason, which nature prepared for him, to transform the work of need into a work of his free choice, and to elevate physical necessity to a moral one. I think that's a beautiful and very succinct statement right there. Nature begins with man no differently than with the rest of its works. We all have a sort of, people call it different things. A mortal dimension, an animal dimension, a physical dimension, and yet we also have a spiritual dimension, a mental, psychic, intellectual, spiritual dimension. Now, we all have instincts. We all have, in modern terms, we could say, like in behavioral science, we have automatic motivations. You know, if we're in the car or something and we're just driving, everything's nice. And I drive my bike, so I'll use the example of my bike. Half the time, you know, when I ride my bike to the gym or something, it's only like halfway through that I realized, I'm like all the way here. Like I left like 15 minutes ago and I was just checked out, thinking about whatever. And I'm like, how didn't I die? Right? Because I was thinking about something that had nothing to do with the car doors opening and, you know, that whole thing. So there are automatic motivations that are there to keep us alive. Reproduction is another, right? Like we're not going to wait for people to sort of have some, you know, intense, mystical, spiritual, you know, unitive life with God or something to reproduce. The species has to reproduce no matter what. If that doesn't happen, everything else is for naught. So if we're taking it from the sort of highest, I'd say, Leibnizian or even theological outlook that we're in the best of all possible worlds, right? God has created the best universe possible. It's not flawed. Despite all the seeming particulars at different times, there seems to be all sorts of problems in the world. Like in the book of Job, same thing. How come he's got boils on his face, and how come so many bad things have happened to him, and yet this is the best world? And so what does that really mean? So I think this is where what Schiller is saying here, nature, there's a whole spectrum of instincts and things in man that are there to steer man until he can come fully online. And naturally, it's hard to come fully online, and it takes a lot of, you know, taking a time out, a distance with oneself to better know oneself. You sort of have to get out of yourself. And so this is what Schiller's talking about. So what is that happy medium between using our reason and sort of investigating what the cause of our feelings and our drives and understanding these things, and at the same time, you know, nobody wants to be a machine and nobody wants to be a savage, right? Because we wouldn't really, what gives a form and structure to our life, right? To how we operate and what drives us, our intentions. And so that's the individual. Now the problem is, right, I keep thinking what's changing. You can go to the next slide. The problem is we're in a state, there's a state, we're in a nation, we're in countries, and many countries. And so everybody has that whole journey that we just talked about that in like 2 minutes that actually can take many lifetimes and still not happen depending on your approach, right? In a nation, you got everybody has that same journey. So it's not one bird, it's however many people you have. Canada has, what, 36 million people? So what we just described times 36 million. And we're a small country, population-wise. So in the legislation of Lycurgus and Solon, Schiller introduces a metaphor that I think we can keep in mind as we start to bridge reason and sense into something that Schiller calls the aesthetic education. The stone suffers patiently from the shaken chisel, and the strings struck by the musician respond without resistance. The legislator alone, with an independent, resisting substance, human freedom. He can only imperfectly fulfill the ideal that he has so clearly laid out in his imagination. But here the attempt alone is worth all praise, if it is undertaken with disinterested goodwill and executed with genuine purpose. So, if we're approaching cultivating truly aristocratic, good people, right? Aristocratic being excellence. So, cultivating a culture of excellence that people can sort of look to and use as sort of a guide to discover that unique expression of that same excellence and potential in themselves. You need some good metaphors. You need some good art, we could say. some good culture that's going to allow people to get a sense of how to do that. But the problem is they have to do it themselves, right? Here Schiller is saying the legislator alone deals with an independent resisting substance. So Lao Kun, very hard to make. I imagine that I wasn't there, but it looks very intricate. A free human being, that sort of where freedom and necessity, where people freely choose the good, the beautiful, the true, not because they're compelled, right? Not just because they're shamed, right? Depending on the kind of, or some other, they're scared, but to actually choose beauty. In fact, Schiller points out you can't, all the most noble and best emotions and sort of qualities in man cannot be compelled. You know, you can't be compelled to lay your life down for your brother or your neighbor, or, you know, to save somebody who's being assaulted, or any possible sort of scenario that you could think of. There's free will involved. And so, and yet, how do you shape this? How do we chisel our own wills so that they become stronger and more perfected in line with reason, but yet something that we enjoy, right? We happily sort of enjoy sculpting that thing. So I just want to skip. He says, where does he say it? It can be said, it can be said that every individual carries a pure ideal man in himself, according to his disposition and determination. And it is the great task of his existence, during all his changes, to harmonize with this unchanging unity. This pure man, who manifests himself more or less clearly in every subject, citizen, is represented by the state, the objective and, as it were, authorized form in which the multiplicity of people endeavors to unite itself. Now, however, two different ways can be conceived in which man and time can coincide with man and the idea. Consequently, only two in which the state can assert itself in individuals. Either by the pure man suppressing the empirical man, in that the state suppresses the individual, or by the individual becoming the state, in that man in time ennobles himself to an ideal man. So we're back to the savage versus the barbarian idea here, where, you know, if we're not going to, if man is just in a savage state, and Schiller observes in the legislation of Friedrich and so on, that when the leadership of a society in its adulthood is different from the leadership of a society in its childhood. And so we can imagine, like, in the early, again, this is the noble savage, this is its own myth and thing that we don't, but, you know, the idea of a primitive or archaic man, if you will, you got to try it. And it's very important that everybody follows the rules, right? You have the nomos, the customs, and the traditions. And all these things have a very sort of sacred quality to them, right? And you have a lot of superstition, you could say, attached to that. And belief structures that are very ironclad. We can't start just, you know, I'm a nuanced man, I like this, but I don't like that, you know. Because if people start doing that, the tribe is pretty much as good as dead, right? Like if cohesion comes apart, you're not just threatening yourself, you're threatening the very survival of the tribe. So it's a very big deal. And so in evolutionary terms, things like shame, right, which we still have, you got to keep people in line, right? And if shame doesn't work, if the covert weapons don't work, well, you get the big stick, or whatever the equivalent of the big stick, the stake, the bear, I don't know, get the stick the bear. But you got to do something, otherwise it's dangerous. So here, so that's primitive, you could say, man in his childhood. But if that's the only thing that is guiding man, is sort of shame and fear, reward and punishment, cookie versus whip, I mean, are you really going to create good people? Are you going to create creative people? Are you going to create people who can tap into something subjective like creativity and discover, the laws of the universe or the laws of their own mind? Probably not. Are we going to have nice art? Well, technically, we don't have time for that. If we're in a sort of, survival mode, nomadic or otherwise, most of it, is dedicated to, survival, making sure there's enough food in our babies' tummies. That's the bottom line. And on the other hand, Schiller, again, he talks about the barbarians, where, okay, people sing Conan the Barbarian. I haven't actually, but I know the story, and it's very popular among in the lore of with the Bronze Age stuff. So the opposite of savage, you could say the collective democracy, if you will, like if you sort of go against the opinion, right? Because the tribe is not necessarily based on how the ordering of the heavens or anything else. It's just based on a strict code to keep cohesion. The opposite is the barbarian. You could say Conan asserting his will, sort of the pirates who are free agents. They just sort of pillage and they loot, but they're free agents. They're not slaves to anybody. They kind of do their own thing. There's this Nietzschean quality to them. And like glory, courage, honor, these things are ways that you can distinguish yourself. But again, so there are these abstract principles, if you will, that the barbarians believe in very rigorously, in the same way that the savages have their nomos and their and the savages respond very much to the immediate. The barbarians have their strict code, whether it's relevant to the situation or not. There's something that they're all honed in on. But I guess the paradox here is, let's say there's a virtue of courage and glory. This is coming back. It's very popular among young people. That's why I like Templar imagery, crusades, people who are brave. But what's courage or bravery if you don't have the discernment to know if you're fighting on the right side, for example, right? If you're just supposed to be a big, strong, tough guy, what if you're actually fighting for like the Satanist bad guys who are just using God's name in vain, right? Like the Templars, sort of saying, this is for God. And now go kill those 30,000 babies or whatnot. That's not cool. That's not appropriate. So is there a happy medium? Is there an aesthetic? Is there a discerning agency that man can have to know when, like, well, that can't be it, right? Is there a Socratic reason? Is there really at least to use negation to be like, well, that can't be it. If I put that out, is there a better way to do it? Just as a thought experiment. Right there's a certain aesthetic process that has to happen because you're no longer just dealing with the real or immediate, but you're going into your imagination. You're not relying on just what's in front of you. You're saying, what if, often creative types, or you'll hear people, they get an idea. What if, somebody suggests something like, that's a bad idea, but what if, right? Imagine that, and then you think of something else. So there's the aesthetic faculties start to come in there. And we can test things. We can try it. So again, if man is to become free, and freedom is a necessary condition for humanity, lest we remain savages or barbarians, either compelled by sort of blind, tyrannical beliefs that are not in line with human nature and require like a lot of, killing or whatnot, or if it's very lawless, going with impulses or just opinion, doxa, for the benefit of the collective. I mean, sure, but and another way to put it is like the barbarians. There's the idea of the individual and striving in the tribe. You don't really have a sovereign identity. Your individuality is mediated by the tribe. You only exist to the degree that we recognize you as a part of the sort of collective. So the individual is not very special. In the other way, the individual is can do whatever he wants if he's got like the right, the abs or whatnot. We can go to the next one. Yeah. So this support is not found in the natural character of man, who, egotistical and violent, aims at the destruction rather than the preservation of society. It is found just as little in his moral character, which hypothetically should first be formed, and which, because it is free, and because it never appears, can never be acted upon and never be counted on with certainty by the lawgiver. It depends on disassociating arbitrariness from the physical character and freedom from the moral character. It depends on the first conforming with laws, the latter with sensuous impressions, on removing the former somewhat further from matter in order to bring the latter somewhat closer to it. To create a third character, which, related to these other two, might pave the way from the rule of mere force to the rule of law, and without preventing the development of the moral character, might serve as a sensuous pledge of invisible morality. So here, Schiller, again in his letters, these are very rigorous and extensive letters that people should, dive into. So we're just getting some teasers here. What he lays out in this context is that there's a formal drive and a sensuous drive, right? We've talked about reason and sense. So he's saying, well, how do you bring these two together, right? And it's true that even if we're just talking about ideas or philosophy, that's still disembodied, that's still abstract. And if we're just talking about feelings, that has no form whatsoever, and it's constantly changing and can't really be relied upon if you want any kind of consistency in life, right? So this is where Schiller introduces, he states it early on, this is where he introduces the aesthetic. So here, I love this statement when we consider discussions about art, contemporary art especially. Schiller says, ideal art must abandon reality and elevate itself with sufficient boldness above need. For art is the daughter of freedom, and she receives her rules from the necessity of the spirit, not from the pressing need of matter. So a lot of art, if we think about the 20th century, where we hear things like realism and surrealism, there are all these polarities, right? Realism was a big deal, like why would somebody, people like, why would there be like a Homeric epic in the modern world? Like we don't need, that's outdated, that's archaic. Now we need like psychological dramas about, there's good ones, but everything has to be like it is today. So Shakespeare, that's old, right? That's dead white European males. You got to have like nice, crisp, punchy dialogue, all sorts of things. And so what happens if we take this realism route or this contemporary sort of, what if we live in a shitty society? Is art just going to reflect that shitty society? And so art, which is what we're told with modernism, that was one of the big things after the Holocaust, World War II, lots of bad things happened. And so, Adorno has these quotes of one of the, famous Frankfurt School art critics, which fans of Adorno will say they're out of context and whatnot, but it captures the spirit, which can be found in various places where, like, how could you paint a Mona Lisa after the Holocaust? Who could write a Ninth Symphony, an ode to joy, after the Holocaust? Right, so art has to now reflect the complexities of the real world. Okay, and it's okay. So we can reflect the complexity, sure. But does that mean art has to be ugly? Right? And so what is our idea of man and the universe, which is really informing how we process, things like tragedy, bad events, and whatnot. So here's Schiller with, ideal art must abandon reality and elevate itself with sufficient boldness above need. For art is the daughter of freedom, and should receive her rules from the necessity of the spirit, not from the pressing need of matter. Now, this is where a lot of people today would say Schiller is an idealist, right? You starry-eyed Anglos or you whatnot, you're not in touch with reality or the evil in man, right? And so if the evil in man is not checked, right, this is where you get the barbarian, mastering as a Christian Templar or something. You got to, keep people in line, or an Inquisition or something else. There's a million different variations. I'm not thinking any specific. Or you have the modern savagery, which this crusading stuff is a response to, which is people just like freedom, freedom, freedom. Feelings are pure no matter what, right? Just be true to your feelings, be authentic. That's a big thing in art. But what about like rage? Okay, so you're angry, you want to punch the person in the face. Well, if you're going to be authentic, you should do it, right? So naturally, feelings alone is these pure things or these guides. It's not hard to do a thought experiment here to see there's a million situations where no, we don't need to respond to every feeling. They're guides, but they're also prompts for different reasons. It is true that the distinction disappears in the purely moral estimation. For reason is satisfied only when its law alone prevails unconditionally. But in the complete anthropological human estimation, in which content counts as well as form, and the living feeling has a voice at the same time, the distinction is all the more evident. Indeed, reason demands unity, but nature demands multiplicity, and both legislations lay claim to man. The law of reason is engraved on him by an incorruptible consciousness, the law of nature by an indestructible feeling. Hence, it will always testify to a still defective development when the moral character can only assert itself by sacrificing the natural character. And a state constitution will be still very incomplete, which produces unity only by suppressing multiplicity. The state should not only respect the objective and species character, it should also respect the subjective and specific character of the individual. And while it extends the invisible realm of morals, it must not depopulate the realm of phenomena. This is Plato, right? So Schiller is a student of Plato. This is the one in the many paradox, right? How is the one reason, unity, yet present in every particular? How's the maximum, right, God present in the minimum, or the macrocosm, man, or the macrocosm and the microcosm? How do we bridge that seeming paradox between the one and the many? If we're summing everything up, I mean, everything comes down, you can pretty much take a measure of somebody by seeing how they resolve that paradox between the one and the many. How does every individual, if they're made in the image of God, right, express that divine spark, which is universal to everybody, but yet each person is a unique individual image, such that everyone is different. So how do you bridge these two worlds? And so Schiller here, being a student of Plato, having studied the Republic, where Plato ends the Republic on the question of the poets and whether we should allow them into the Republic, because the poets were the image makers, and so they sort of define the psycho-cosmological matrix, as Dr. Kwon would call it, the image matrix in our mind of what is good, glory, fight, courage, opinion. So to the degree that the poets, if their images are misleading, they may feel good, they may be very appealing, everybody wants to be special and be a hero and glory, right? If you start selling this to young people, especially like in our age, right? We're in a sort of declined post-industrial civilization. It's like, hey, do you want to become great? You have a little thirst for greatness? Well, come with us. So this is very popular among kids today. So this is where this question becomes so relevant. So Schiller is saying here, as a poet, he's going back to the one and the many. And yes, there's a principle of reason, and there's a world of constant change. multiplicity, sensual experience, succession upon succession. So how does the unity, how do you have harmony? How do you maintain that unity among all the parts? And so Schiller here is saying that art is the middle ground. And as we said, you can go to the next slide. Art, the ideal art, which is not chained to the actual, allows for this sort of, Schiller talked about the hypothetical now. It allows for this subjective condition to now be explored, but to make it visceral, right? To give it some flesh and bones, and to give people an experience of that. So how does Schiller talk about art, right? We've all heard, today, we just talked about the contemporary idea of realism, and now it's going the other way. I've been doing some extra work on films and stuff, and I was talking to all sorts of, everybody's got their short film and all sorts of film students. Interesting, you get to hear how the creative types are thinking. And there were some interesting things that were pointed out where one of them was saying, now film is going the opposite way, where fantasy, like Dune 2, like epic fantasy and these things that we were told were passé are coming back. And realism, what matters more is aesthetics now, especially that's the new thing. So how you portray, and people will observe this with films, that a lot of the cinematography can be very good, right? It's very stunning. That doesn't mean there's content though, right? That doesn't mean there's character development. But you have very aesthetically pleasing things, and they don't necessarily have to be anchored in what's going on in the world right now. And like, why would you if there's a lot of ugly things going on in the world? So you can go to something else. But does fantasy mean unreality or sort of abandoning reason? You have reason in art, right? You still have to make discoveries in art. You still have to develop not only technique, but wrestle with paradoxes. So that's where Schiller says art, like science, they like to separate these things these days, right? Art, like science, is free from everything that is practical and is established by human convention. And both rejoice in an absolute immunity from human lawlessness. The political legislator can enclose their territory, but he cannot govern within it. He can outlaw the friend of truth, but the truth exists. He can humiliate the artist, but he cannot degrade art. Indeed, nothing is more common than for both science and art to pay homage to the spirit of the age, and for creative taste to accept the law of critical taste. Where the character becomes rigid and hardens, we see science strictly guarding its borders, and art plodding along with heavy shackles of rules. So more the barbaric, the formalism, right? So just rules, but where the character grows hard and lax, science will strive to please. And art, we're going to the Jeff Bezos' spaceship just to get a view of, the atmosphere, and then we go back and work in the factory. Where the character grows hard and lax, science will strive to please, and art will strive to entertain. I like that. For entire centuries, philosophers and artists have been occupied in plunging truth and beauty into the depths of vulgar humanity. The philosophers and artists are submerged there, but truth and beauty struggle triumphantly to the surface with their own indestructible vitality. And so, we see, so Schiller here is introducing a very nuanced take. We talk about the aristocratic man, excellence. A formulation I like is the nuanced man. What is an aristocratic man, if not somebody who practices discernment, right? He's not just thinking in terms of formulas. If you're a judge and you're judging somebody based on their actions, in a real case, you have to take into account the context, right? If you're just a strict legalist and it's like this was done, or not even in a legal situation, but just in life, we have to have an appreciation. Schiller talks about this in his essay on theater, that you have to consider what the person's been through if you're going to judge the person appropriately. Some people are demons, and there's not real reason for it. They sort of allow themselves to go hog wild. Other people are pretty, they've done a lot of work on themselves despite having gone through, unspeakable things. You can't judge these people at the same level. So you need discernment, you need nuance. And it's the same for ideas. It's the same for art. So that being said, Schiller's talking here about morality in art. And I think this is where people today, they start to get a bit shaky, right, in the contemporary world. Like, like everybody has to, say the same thing. Everybody's just going to be robots, And so then it's like, that's fascism, right? So today you're the fascist because you're saying there's an objective criteria for judging beauty, right? And the feelings of everybody, which is what they're expressing in their art. So who are you to say that person's feelings are shitty or bad or good? You're a tyrant. And so freedom just becomes, the will and expressing whatever comes to that person at the moment. I don't know if people have walked through Concordia and the art installation there, but yeah, it's for people, it's ridiculous. It's that table cut up into wood chips and put in that basket, and it's a whole assortment. Maybe that's even nicer. The thing with the holding the microphones and stuff, I kind of like that. It's a lot more effective. So does that make me a tyrant for me, sort of pointing out hey, come on, is there a happy medium? So here's Schiller. So Schiller's going to amp it up here. He's going to lean in. The artist, it is true, is the son of his age, but pity for him if he is its pupil or even its favorite. Let some beneficent divinity snatch him when a suckling from the breast of his mother, and nurse him with the milk of a better time, that he may ripen to his full stature beneath the distant Grecian sky. And having grown to manhood, let him return, a foreign shape, into his century, not, however, to delight it by his presence, but terrible, like the son of Agamemnon, to purify it. The matter of his works he will take from the present, but their form he will derive from the nobler time. Nay, from beyond all time, from the absolute unchanging unity of his nature. Here, from the pure ether of his spiritual essence flows down the fountain of beauty, uncontaminated by the pollutions of ages and generations, which roll to and fro in their turbid vortex far beneath it. I almost feel like that's self-explanatory. We know what he's getting across. What do people think of this statement? Any thoughts, feelings? If anybody has that. Does it feel clear? I feel like Schiller is communicating something profound here. So one more, this is all from the 9th letter. But how does the artist protect himself against the corruptions of his time, which surround him on all sides? By despising its judgment. He looks upward to his dignity and the law, not downward to chance and need. Equally free from the futile activity which would gladly make its mark on the fleeting moment, and from the impatient, fanatically zealous spirit which applies the measure of the absolute to the miserable creations of age. Let him abandon the sphere of the actual to the understanding, which is at home here. However, let him strive for the union of the possible with the necessary to produce the ideal. Let him stamp it on deception and truth alike. Let him coin it in the playthings of his imagination and in the seriousness of his actions upon every sensuous and spiritual form and hurl it silently into infinite time. Any thoughts? I love these quotes. These are some bangers. No? Am I alone to like these? These are people have any thoughts. Okay. And so yeah, we'll look at an example or two. And here, keep it on there. I just want to see if that's the one side right. So yeah, how does the artist protect himself? Just to unpack this setup. look at next. So by despising this judgment. Yeah, so I mean, here he's saying something profound because he's saying, okay, if we're talking about the masses or the demos, right, which is governed by doxa, right, opinion. Dr. Kwon has often laid out the hierarchy here, but so at the bottom you have the tyrants, who are sort of just their will and absolute power, asserting it over others to control. After, above them, the demos, which was in charge for a while, the opinions of the masses or the will, the collective will, since it wasn't anchored in anything true or durable, at a certain point, the fabric of society starts to come apart. I mean, we're living in it now. I think people are, you know, what does that look like? And above that, you can call them different things, the oligarchs, the magicians, right? The people who are able to manipulate opinion. So they have savvy, they're very shrewd, but they are not using it to make discoveries, let's say, or encouraging people to make discoveries of what's actually true. They're using it to govern. And so here, so you can't just rely on the judgment of the masses, but at the same time, it's not just about imposing a principle. You need, the artist has to be able to capture truth, basically what Schiller's saying. But so he can't depend on opinion in order to know what's good. You know, what do people like, right? Should the artist just dedicate himself to making entertaining things? A lot of artists do that, but they're sucked down as a result, right? They're brought down into the vortex, and then you're gambling. Are you really gonna, are you just gonna get cozy? So the artist that Schiller's describing has to be in the upper, above the magicians and the demos and the tyrants, right? You have the aristocrats, the philosopher kings, and so the nuanced men and women who are practicing a higher kind of discernment. And so the artist is the one that is bridging, that is able to give us images of reason and sense. And let's look at some examples. So I think this one, we'll just take two, and we're gonna wrap it up soon. So many people with something to ponder. I love it. This is the myth of Icarus and Daedalus. So the mythic inventor Daedalus and his son Daedalus was the craftiest and most inventive, legendary inventive figure of the archaic Greek world. He's known for his statues were so. It was such a master sculpture that his statues looked like they were moving. People thought the statues were moving. He created the compass and all sorts of navigation tools. And when he had to flee Athens after he did some crafty bad things, he found refuge in Crete in the pay of King Minos, the legendary King Minos. And there's a whole thing with the wife and a bull attraction, all sorts of weird things, and basically a Minotaur is born, and now they have to control this crazy Minotaur thing, and so Daedalus is charged with creating a labyrinth to lock this untamable feast inside, and so that's one of these depictions of that. You're drawn into labyrinths, you'll never get out, and so Daedalus was a very crafty guy. And finally, because the Minos got upset with him for X, Y, Z, and now he had to flee Crete. And but they didn't have access to, depending on which version of the myth you take, either they didn't have access to ships, they couldn't sail away, or they had to get out of the labyrinth themselves because they were thrown into this punishment. So Daedalus came up with he made wings. Right, so that they could fly out. So he used the wax and the wings, and they were able to escape from Crete. But he gave his son a warning. Icarus, careful once you start to get up there, don't fly too close to the sun because the wax is going to melt. And yeah, it's bye-bye. And so Icarus is, not as shrewd as his father, younger, never really been burnt, proverbially speaking, by, or, the notion of consequences is not as visceral. You're a young fella like Icarus. So finally he falls and dies. And there are so many things we could say about this myth. There's a reason this is constantly treated. These are different renditions from different artists from the 17th century. I believe that's from the 19th century. This is just a part of an etching from like an emblem, a seal, I believe, from again, I think 17th century. And this even predates, it seems, the Greek myths as such. Like you have the older Crete and Minoan civilization or Mycenaean. So some of these myths seem to go back even further than, say, or Troy or whatnot, or things associated with one period. So this has never gone away. Does man always have to fly too close to the sun? Does telling somebody, don't stop sinning, don't fly too close to the sun, stop lying, stop eating, all these different things. Is there a way to, is there another way? Pretty much. And so Schiller is already giving us an intimation. He's saying, well, you need an aesthetic judgment. You need a taste for something beyond just these dualities that we were describing, whether you want to be a savage or you want to be a barbarian. And if you're not going to be stuck, vacillating, or having often both, right? In any situation, you can often find they coincide. Like Cynthia pointed out with polarities, like fascism, democracy, they kind of work together. It's the fascisti is the thing that binds everything. You need the mass. You have a fascist sort of government. You need that mass brute force behind you that will just sort of crush everything. So a lot of these seemingly contradictory things, barbarians, savages, fascism, democracy, they tend to, come full circle. So this is one myth, and that poses a paradox. How does Icarus know to not? How does he avoid flying too close to the sun? Right? As he got up, he'd never flown before. I've never flown. Plane, yes, but the sun. You see the sun for the first time. It's so bright. It's Apollo. Brightness, and you just want to get a better look at Apollo and be like, hey, that's who we're all worshiping, though. Can we not get acquainted with the divine and get a better sense of that? But so Daedalus had a craftiness. He had this inventive mind, and which got him so far, and yet it also lost him his son. So in my mind, the question is there a difference between craftiness and wisdom? Craftiness can help you get out of all sorts of things, can help you sort of prolong or delay fate, if you will, in the Greek sense. But does it ever really get you out of anything, figuratively speaking? Versus wisdom, which, just because you're wise doesn't mean there's not tragedy. But you can't actually go wrong if you're using wisdom. Right, and the fate is fate, regardless. But are there people who try to escape their fate only to sow something even more hideous, unnatural, and scary? Right, rather than just having the wisdom to recognize what's what. And the other one, Cassandra. Right, so Cassandra is the prophetess. She's the priestess of Apollo, and Apollo liked her very much, gave her the gift of prophecy, and but then she did not want to return his, feeling was not mutual, and so he said, okay, well, you couldn't take the power away, so he just said, well, nobody will believe you. She was cursed, nobody will believe her. So, you know, warning the Trojans, warning, foreseeing all sorts of bad things. Nobody's listening to her. And so, I mean, so here are, I think, Shelley talks about the poets as being a kind of having a prophetic quality, right? They're able to foresee. I should have the They're able to foresee events that describe the character or spirit of them, even if they don't capture, you know, at this time, X place, this guy's going to come and hit you over the head. That's not what being a poet is. But being able to recognize a higher lawfulness and see how that plays out. I mean, what is Shakespeare? What is a tragedy, if not giving people a gift of prophecy, if you will, that man has the power to, if you do certain things, here's what stupid looks like, right? If you want to play this out, whether it's pride, whether it's this, whether it's that, if we don't want people to play out every dumb scenario in real life, well, there has to be a way. What if they could play it out on the stage, right? What if they could see it played out before them instead of living in it? So Schiller here, we're going to come to a close very soon. Everything I'm talking about now, yeah, so thus the fine arts have their purpose in common with nature, or actually with their author. They playfully grant what pleasure their more serious system allows us to obtain only with labor. They make a gift of what is usually the bitterly won prize of much effort. We purchase enjoyments of the mind with straining diligence, the sanction of reason with painful sacrifice, the pleasure of the senses with austere abstinence, or atone for the excesses of these with a train of suffering. Only art affords us pleasures which need not first be earned, which demand no sacrifice, and need not be purchased with repentance. So here we have this middle ground, which offers so many possibilities, and of the different genres. The tragic is, you know, has been considered by many, I'd say rightly so, one of the most exalted is tragic, because of the power that it actually gives man. And I think it's ironic. The idea that tragedy, if we want to avoid tragedy and we want to have a nice society, you know, motivated by beauty, truth, and goodness, you know, the irony is we probably need a lot of tragedy. But the question is, do we want it in the real world, or do we want to have the kind of art that awakens these higher faculties and gives citizens the gift of prophecy, rather than, you know, just having Cassandras running around with no one listens? I'll leave with one last one, just because Schiller is so great to just fun to read. The seriousness of your principles will frighten them away from you, but they will accept them in play. Their taste is more chaste than their heart, and that is where you must take hold of the shy one who is willing. You will besiege their maxims in vain. To no avail will you condemn their deeds, but you can try your formative hand with their indolence. Chase away what is arbitrary, the frivolity, the crudeness from their pleasures. And in that way, you shall banish these unnoticed from their deeds and find their beliefs. Wherever you find them, surround them with noble, with grand, with brilliant forms. Surround them with symbols of what is excellent, until the appearance vanquishes reality, and art vanquishes nature.
Dave, that was cool. Do you have any recommendations for anything that people could read or listen to as far as getting like a first-hand engagement?
We have the letters on the aesthetic education available online.